You lie in bed at 2 a.m., disgusted with yourself. Again, you swore this morning that today would be different. You made promises to yourself, maybe to God, maybe to somebody you love. You set new rules. Maybe you downloaded another blocker. This time would be the last time. You told yourself the last time this happened. But here you are, the same cycle, the same shame, the same crushing sense that maybe you are just different than other people who don't seem to have this problem. Broken, perhaps. I know that feeling because I lived it personally for over a decade. I remember lying in my childhood bedroom when I was 16 years old, having just relapsed for what felt like the 1,000th time, staring at the ceiling and thinking, what is wrong with me? Why can't I stop this? And then I remember being 19 or 20, now in college, academically successful, spiritually committed, surrounded by friends who had no idea about my secret life. And then I remember being 22, having tried at the time what I thought was literally everything. Accountability software, therapy, hundreds of books, all the podcasts, the NoFap forums, elaborate systems of rules and consequences, and still finding myself back at square one, convinced that I was utterly, uniquely, irredeemably broken. And the worst part is not the behavior itself. It was this progressive erosion of self-trust. Every failed attempt to quit pornography was another piece of evidence in the case that I was building against myself. See, you can't do this. You are weak. You lack discipline. Something is fundamentally wrong with you that isn't wrong with other people. This video is going to be part one of a two-part series. And in this one, I'm going to show you the invisible operating system that is ruining your life without your conscious awareness. The root mechanisms from which all of your stuck patterns grow. In part two, I'll show you what must die for you to finally be set free and what emerges from that death. But first, we need to understand why you're stuck. And it's not what you think. There's a story that cuts through millennia to speak directly to what we face. Now, this is a story which I want to approach from a symbolic or archetypal perspective, meaning in a way that speaks to the universal experience of the human condition, not from a religious perspective per se. And this story is the one of Abraham. In the story, Abraham is living in his homeland, somewhere comfortable, familiar, and safe. And he'd been there for way too long. 75 years. Everything that he knows is there. His family, his business, his routines, the patterns that he has spent literally decades of his life building. And in the story, all of a sudden, God shows up with a call, meaning in the story, God is also equated with that which calls us to the adventure of our life. But anyway, he says, leave, go to a land that I will show you. I'll make you into a great nation, and through your bloodline, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. That's a pretty absurd promise. Abraham is 75 years old. His wife is barren. He has no children, no heir. And God, the call to adventure, is suddenly telling him to leave everything familiar and to walk towards the complete unknown based on a promise that seems impossible. Now, if you know the story, the entire trajectory, symbolically speaking, of human redemption through the Judeo-Christian story, the bloodline that would eventually bring forth Christ, the hope of the world and the salvation of all mankind, runs through Abraham. And it depends on him being willing to leave the familiar for the unfamiliar. So the entire story hinges on one man's willingness to trade safety for calling and comfort for the adventure of his life that is also his destiny. But the main reason that I bring up this story is to focus on the obstacle to him going on that adventure. What is it that he had to contend with and to overcome to answer the call on his life so that all of these things could come into being? It's not external obstacles. In the story, the only thing between Abraham and his destiny is limiting beliefs and his attachment to what is familiar. I want to pause for a moment and just kind of let that land. And here we enter the paradox, which I want to focus on in this video from multiple angles, not just the symbolic, but also the cognitive, the neurological. And that is this: the paradox that you are facing in your recovery journey and in every attempt that you make to change is that the thing that feels like safety is actually what is holding you back. The familiar suffering you know feels safer than the unfamiliar freedom you don't. Your entire life, your purpose, your relationships, your freedom, the person that you are meant to become is waiting on the other side of your willingness to leave what is familiar, to leave home. But something in you won't let go. Something keeps pulling you back to what is familiar, as is said later in the biblical corpus, like a dog returning to its vomit, even when what is familiar is killing you. This is what we are here to understand, because until you see the mechanism that is keeping you trapped, you will keep mistaking the prison for safety. Now, with respect to pornography addiction, you've been told that you need, in various forms, more willpower, more discipline, better strategy, stronger faith, more information, better accountability. But you've tried all of it. Probably. I did. Most of the people that I know certainly did. You have resisted and powered through the urges to the best of your ability, resisted with all of your might. You've read every book, you've watched every YouTube video, you've listened to the podcasts, you've done the meditation, you understand the neuroscience of addiction better than most therapists. You've confessed, you've prayed, you've bargained, you've made elaborate plans, you've blocked every website, you've deleted the apps, you've created every possible barrier and boundary, only to watch your addiction plow through it hours, days, or, as I say, let's be honest, minutes later. And you're still here. And so what if I told you that the reason that you cannot seem to change has nothing to do with a willpower or discipline deficiency, or a deficiency of moral strength, as if the reason why you're stuck is because you're just not a good enough person. You're not holy enough or pure enough or some crazy idea like that. Instead, I want to ask you this: what if the entire framework out of which you have been trying to solve this problem, the paradigm you've been operating within, is fundamentally misunderstanding and mischaracterizing the actual problem? In this video, I'm going to reveal the invisible operating system that's been running your life without your conscious awareness. What cognitive science and neuroscience have shown us that works hand in hand with some of these archetypal stories is actual understanding that they're representative of a biological reality. And that biological reality is something called allostasis. Now, allostasis is very similar to the word homeostasis, which, if you remember from your high school biology class, is what it is like when a biological system finds an equilibrium, where causes of life, like birth rates, and causes of death, like predation, balance each other out, creating a stable but dynamic system. Outside of the populations of deer or rabbit or something like that, many things in the biological world operate around a core of homeostasis. They seek some kind of homeostatic basis. And your nervous system is one such thing. But the thing that your nervous system is trying to stabilize is stress. This stress stabilization is known as allostasis. Now, to make this a bit more experiential, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been through school, let's say, through college, through a very stressful period of life, and you find that what at first felt very demanding eventually kind of became normal? Like you could just kind of show up and do the work that at a different place in your life might have felt like, oh my gosh, this is way too much. You notice that your nervous system adapted to the higher stress load and stabilized around it. That is allostasis. You see, what's interesting and adaptive about the human nervous system is that you are adaptive, meaning I can put you in different contexts and you will adapt. What once was stressful and unknown and unfamiliar will become known, and then your stress levels around that thing will lower and you will stabilize there. So what's important to know and take away from this is the understanding that your nervous system is coded in such a way that what is familiar, let me say that again, what is familiar is safe, what is unfamiliar is stressful and dangerous. The part of your nervous system that navigates these realities is pre-moral. It's not making good or bad judgments about what is familiar or what is unfamiliar. It is literally the lizard brain part of you that is just assessing for familiarity and predictability and for unfamiliarity and chaos. That is the part of your brain that is resisting the efforts that you are making to change. Whatever your familiar patterns are, whatever the known predictable cycles are that you've been going through, have been coded by this part of your nervous system as safe, even when what you've grown familiar with is hell on earth. I want to say this again to really drive this point home, because we hit ourselves with so much moralizing shame and judgment around a part of our brain and a part of our psychology that is pre-moral. Your nervous system does not distinguish between the moral qualities of these actions or this thing would be good for me to do, therefore I should do it, or this thing would be bad for me to do, therefore I shouldn't do it. It only is viewing things through the lens of familiarity and unfamiliarity. It just knows what is familiar equals safe, what is unfamiliar equals danger. This is why some part of us seems to resist change with such power, even when you desperately want it. Your conscious mind, your prefrontal cortex, is saying, I want to be free from this addiction. Meanwhile, your lizard brain, your limbic system, and the more base layers of your nervous system, the part of you operating below conscious awareness, which actually has way more power than the conscious mind and prefrontal cortex, is looking at it as dangerous, simply because you are stepping out into what is unfamiliar. As the sense of perceived danger gets higher, the safety-seeking impulse to keep you in what is familiar will grow proportionally. And I just really want to drive this home, because for me and for many of the people that I work with, this insight liberates them from an enormous amount of shame. This is not an example of a weakness. This is not a moral failure. This is biology. This is a part of your brain actually operating exactly as it's supposed to. The problem is that it is misidentifying what is safe. This segues into what I call safety scripts, these automatic programs installed into your mind, written in childhood, usually in response to real threats or to the absence of the ability to meet your needs. Maybe vulnerability led to conflict, punishment, or rejection within your family or friend groups when you were younger. Maybe expressing needs resulted in conflict or abandonment. Maybe you didn't have parents or caregivers around you who were emotionally attuned or available or had enough emotional bandwidth to actually care about you. Maybe your family was so dysfunctional that you learned that connection with others is the same thing as pain. Maybe being yourself led to shame or punishment. And so your nervous system learned its equations. To stay safe, I need to stay isolated. To stay safe, I need to stay in control. To stay safe, I need to avoid vulnerability and only show what will prevent conflict. To stay safe, I need to manage everything, because if I don't, no adult around me will. And so fast forward in time, and now these patterns continue to operate into adulthood. Every stuck pattern in your life, the shame that won't seem to go away, the need for control, the isolation, the relentless pursuit of achievement, your inability to ask for help. These aren't separate problems. They are all expressions of the same root safety script. They are all variations on the same theme. Familiar suffering is safer than unfamiliar freedom. And now I want to show you how this one root system of the safety script branches out into what look like different problems, but are actually manifestations of the same core mechanism expressing itself in different ways. Expression 1, the shame identity. If you're struggling with pornography addiction, and if you're like me, you probably don't just feel shame about what you do. Shame has become who you are. It's the organizing principle of your entire identity. And this serves a function, because if you're fundamentally defective, you never have to risk being vulnerable, or responsible. You never have to let real people see you because they'd just reject me anyway if they knew the truth, right? This is a safety script. This safety script says it is safer to live in constant shame, isolation, and hide from everyone than to risk being vulnerable and potentially experience rejection, abandonment, or the other painful experiences that come as a result of genuine connection. The familiar hell of shame feels safer than the unfamiliar risk of connection because shame is known. It keeps everything in your life predictable. Actually opening up with vulnerability to seek authentic connection opens up a realm of chaos where enormous pain suddenly becomes possible. Expression 2, the control illusion. Again, if you're like me, you have probably tried relentlessly to think your way out of your problems, to understand your way out, to manage your way out, to control your way out, to get more information, better strategies, perfect systems, more optimal routines. Like if you can just figure out the right approach, you'll finally master this thing and get the outcome that you want. But control is the problem masquerading as the solution. I'm gonna say that again. Control is the problem masquerading as the solution, because trying to control everything creates the very pressure that makes release necessary. The more you try to control, you will realize you never end up with control. All you end up with is anxiety. The tighter you grip, the more explosive the final collapse. This too is a safety script. It says, it is safer to stay in the illusion of control, even if that control is killing me, than to surrender to forces I don't understand or cannot manage. The familiar illusion of control feels safer than the unfamiliar experience of surrender and trust, because control is known. Surrender and trusting is dangerous. Expression 3 is the isolation trap. And again, like me, you've probably tried to do this alone for years, probably decades even, because asking for help feels like admitting defeat and the reality of personal inadequacy. Depending on others feels like the same thing as admitting fundamental weakness. Being vulnerable or depending on others inside of a community feels like exposing yourself to a dangerous identity. I'm now the person who needed help. But addiction is an isolation disorder. You cannot solve isolation with more isolation. You cannot heal a relational wound through continued loneliness. It's like trying to learn how to swim while refusing to ever get in the water. The incredible irony here is that actually you are your weakest in isolation and your strongest inside of a community. And this is, you guessed it, a safety script. It says it is safer to stay stuck alone than to risk depending on others and potentially experiencing disappointment or betrayal. The familiar loneliness feels safer than unfamiliar experiences of genuine connection, because isolation is known, vulnerable community is unknown. Expression 4, and we'll do one more of these, is the achievement trap. Again, like me, you've probably tried to prove your worth through what you can produce, how you can perform, what you can achieve, what you can build. Your value is conditional. You only matter and you're only good enough when you're succeeding, and you don't matter when you're failing. And pornography becomes the release valve for the unbearable pressure of constant performance and from constantly being burdened with the sense that who we are is a project that constantly has to be worked on and improved. The irony is that life is the one arena where you are guaranteed to fail. And so where you can't achieve inevitably is where your unworthiness seems to get confirmed. It's the shadow side of your achievement identity. As long as achievement forms the basis of your worth, you will always feel insecure. And this, my friends, is a safety script. It says it's safer to keep proving my worth through achievement, even though it's exhausting and makes addiction inevitable, than to rest in inherent worth that I've never experienced and haven't earned. This is an experience when approval is what is known and familiar, and love is what is unknown and dangerous. And finally, for this video, we're going to go through expression 5, which is the salvation fantasy. That somewhere in your unconscious lives the belief that someone or something external is going to save you. The magic bullet, the perfect relationship, the ideal therapist, the revolutionary program, the spiritual experience, the hero within me that I've been waiting to appear for the last 15 years of my life. Salvation is always coming from the outside. So I don't ever have to do the terrifying and brutal and hard work of saving myself. Now, there's some nuance here because I do not believe that true healing comes from within. It comes from connection. But you and only you can make the decision to take the actions that will result in the connection that you so desperately need. This salvation fantasy maintains the problem that it promises to solve. Waiting for rescue prevents you from taking responsibility and then taking the action that responsibility would necessitate. Seeking external salvation maintains internal helplessness. I'm going to say that again. Seeking external salvation maintains internal helplessness. And this, unsurprisingly, it's a safety script. It's safer to keep waiting for something to save me from my patterns and myself than for me to accept that I am responsible for my own transformation and that I will make mistakes and fail if I decide to accept that responsibility and take actions to move forward. The familiar hope that rescue is coming feels safer than the unfamiliar terror of personal responsibility. Because waiting is known and it doesn't require much effort. It just requires the constant experience of pain and suffering in the absence of purpose and meaning. Taking ownership and responsibility opens up an entire domain of the unknown and the unpredictable. What if you actually succeed? What if you actually succeed and then fail? What if you take on responsibility and let people down? That's dangerous, but staying in my familiar hell, that's safe. And so do you see it? These are not 5 different problems. They are 5 different expressions of the same root system. Your nervous system has learned that familiar suffering is safer than unfamiliar freedom. But the call to adventure that God symbolizes in that story was an invitation to freedom, to destiny, to transcendent purpose, to being a part of not just something bigger than him, but the greatest story ever told, to making his own contribution to something that would later turn into the salvation of the world. And the important thing about these stories when approached from a symbolic perspective is that they're not just about individuals, they're also about you. The calling on your life has that same power within it. And so Abraham had a choice to make. Would he stay in what is familiar? Or would he take the risk on the unfamiliar promise? The entire rest of the story hinges on the fact that he made the decision to challenge his nervous system's equation of familiar equals safe. And part of the work of really causing transformative change to happen is getting down into what we perceive as safe, into these safety scripts and rewiring it. After all, wouldn't most of you say that actually the safest thing I could do with my life is to pursue freedom, destiny, purpose, and transcendent meaning? And that what's actually dangerous is to stay stuck, addicted, lonely, not who I could be? Here's an absolute powerhouse of a statement that I want to leave you with. Change will become effortless when change becomes what is safe. You can use the power of your nervous system that has previously been keeping you stuck, the thing you cannot seem to overcome despite how much you've thrown at it, the thing that is that powerful. Could you imagine if it was on your side instead of working against you? And so you're facing the exact same choice now. Your home is pornography addiction, shame, isolation, obsessive self-reliance, the I have to do this on my own mentality, the control, the endless striving. All of it is familiar. It creates a very predictably miserable life, and it feels like safety even though it's destroying you. And the question is, will you stay in your home, or will you accept the call to adventure that is your life and take the risk of leaving. And so I hope you understand by this point that the way out of these cycles is not by trying harder or shaming myself for being a bad person. It's through understanding what's actually happening and working with your nervous system instead of against it. Your nervous system needs to learn, not intellectually or propositionally, but experientially, that change is safe. That vulnerability doesn't lead to overwhelming shame, abandonment, rejection, pain, and destruction. That connection is actually what heals. That the unfamiliar can become the familiar. And when it does, it becomes the new safe. But you can't teach your nervous system this alone. Many of these safety scripts are built on relational wounds, meaning they were learned in relationship, and you will heal them only in relationship. In new relationships where connection is safe, where vulnerability is met with real empathy and acceptance, where you can be fully known and still be fully loved. In part 2, in the next video, I'm going to show you what must die for you to be free. I want to continue the story because Abraham didn't just leave home. He had to be willing to place the most important thing, everything that he loved, on an altar to sacrifice it. He had to face deaths that felt like the annihilation of everything that he ever wanted. And it was only through his willingness to go through that process that redemption became possible. The same is true for you. Talking about this is easy. The actual process of change is hard. Certain structures in your life must die. Certain identities must dissolve. Certain attachments must be released. And I'm going to show you exactly what those major things are and what emerges after they die. If what I described here resonates with you, if you recognize that safety scripts are running your life, if you're exhausted from trying to solve this alone, and if you're ready to work with somebody who actually understands the actual mechanisms that are keeping you stuck, I want to invite you to book a free consultation call with me. It's a no strings attached conversation where we'll look at your specific situation and determine whether the comprehensive approach that I've used to help myself and everybody that you see on my channel and the testimonial videos is right for you too. Because you can't think your way out of a nervous system problem. You cannot willpower your way out of a dysregulation issue. You cannot solve an isolation disorder through more isolation. You need a comprehensive approach that gets you inside of a community and then addresses the actual root system. You need a brotherhood of men who are on the same path, who understand the struggle and who will meet your vulnerability with acceptance and real support that's like actually helpful instead of judgment and condemnation. Because your nervous system needs to experience, not just understand, again, but experience that connection is safe, that vulnerability doesn't destroy you, and that change is possible. So again, if that's you, click on that link down in the description and I'll see you on that call. I hope you got some value out of this video and I'll see you in part 2. Thanks. Peace.